So, ADCC rule set. Is this the best rule set ever, or does it totally suck? We're going to break it down point by point. A lot of different rule sets in grappling. Chael Sonnen has talked about how this is a significant problem for grappling. Every event tends to have a different rule set, so it's very hard to determine from that just exactly who is the best grappler on the planet, because every time you go to compete, you compete under different rules. That's not really the case in a lot of other sports. Why all the different rule sets? Well, it probably comes down to the kind of mission statements and goals regarding what people want to do with Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu got started, with the hopes of, teaching people how to fight. The thing is if you go out and fight Vale Tudo style, no rules, you get something that's really like fan favorite, like fans love to watch, like a no rules fight. But at the same time, it's not very, it's not athlete sensitive in some sense, because you've got athletes that, they're going to take so much damage that it's going to be hard to get people to like repeat contracts, repeat fights and stuff like that. So a lot of time, in a lot of ways, jiu-jitsu got started as a competitive sport just to determine like the pecking order amongst the Gracie brothers and cousins and all that kind of stuff. And it's grown now because jiu-jitsu just become a much more popular sport. But yeah, now we're looking at ADCC and you're like, what are all these rules? I don't know how it works. I'm just going to go through rule by rule and kind of you can comment on it later and let me know if you think that's a good rule, bad rule. We'll kind of look at the pros and cons. First big thing to look at that's can be very confusing when people start watching ADCC is the first 5 minutes you can't score. You can only score in the second 5 minutes. And if that's a super fight, the first 10 minutes you can't score. And then you can only score in the second 10 minutes. Is this good or bad? Well, and what is it? Why do it that way? I think there's an argument to be made that this can keep people, or it can kind of limit more explosive fighters from just kind of getting a score early and then stalling for the rest of the match. Because one of the rules that you have to factor in with this is that you do get penalized for non-engagement. So even when you cannot score points, you can actually pick up negatives, and you can pick up negatives for pulling guard, and you pick up a negative for what is considered non-engagement. Now that is going to be pretty subjective. That's going to come from the judge's table, and they hand that off to the ref. So, and that's probably something that people, are going to quibble over for quite a bit, is like, was he really not engaging? A lot of athletes are going to watch previous ADCC matches and try to determine patterns of how they can figure out how they can engage as little as possible and not get penalized. But that's the nature of sport, is that people always kind of find ways to, make the rules work for them. In theory, because you are being penalized for non-engagement, but you have no ability to score, the first 5 minutes I think the goal was that they should result in a sort of in a submission only type of match where people are really actively looking for submissions early on, trying to win. I think in the long run, certain athletes have just found ways to have a minimal level of engagement that they could therefore not get penalized, so that they could wait and get a score at the end of the match. So sometimes it's going to lead to some boring matches. Sometimes it's going to lead to some exciting matches. It's going to come down to the athlete at the end of the day, I would say. So I'm actually a little torn on whether I like this rule or not. I think there's definitely a case to be made that it's going to make people like hand fight for a very long time, instead of like going a little more actively for takedowns out the gate, and kind of wait for the timing when your takedowns are going to score them a lot of points. I think that we'll segue right there into takedowns. One of the biggest differences between ADCC rules and let's say IBJJF rules is that takedowns are scored differently, and guard pulling in particular, or jumping guard, is pretty much it's pretty actively discouraged with the point system. So if you jump guard or sit for about 3 seconds, you're going to get penalized 1 point. On the other hand, if you get a takedown and you end up in a guard formation of some sort, you get 2 points. And if you are able to get what is called a clean takedown, where as a result of the takedown, you end up past the guard into something like cross sides or mount, you're going to get 4 points. Now, so that makes a very big difference. And one thing that's really cool about that, it's actually probably my favorite part of the ADCC scoring, is that it actually acknowledges the differences between what you could think of as a very minor takedown that doesn't result in tremendous dominance and a takedown that does result in significant dominance. Whereas in IBJJF, it's all scored the same, and that can lead to shenanigans and weirdness that I don't like. It's a great way, too, of folding in aspects of judo and various styles of wrestling where I would say they do a good job of accounting for, like, high amplitude throws, like big powerful throws get a little bit more, they usually get scored higher in other wrestling and judo systems, and that's also why you see a lot of former wrestlers turned jiu-jitsu fighters shine in the ADCC arena. Personally, that's probably the part of ADCC that I like the most, is seeing that takedowns have a little more value than they do in IBJJF, and seeing a general lessening of guard pulls and things like that. It doesn't mean they won't happen or that you won't see any. Now let's get into some of the other unique things. Or let's actually look at some of the stuff that's pretty similar and pretty standard. It's like passing the guard is going to be 3 points. Knee on belly, 2 points. Mount is a little different. You're only going to get 2 points for that, but it's also still both knees on the ground. Back gets scored a little higher than mount, and I think this might be a point of contention here, but you can score in the back 3 points, and if you get a body triangle from the back, you can also get 3 points for that. I personally am not so sure that should go that way. I think mount, if you asked me to make the ADCC rules, I would have made mount score just as highly as the back. I know in jiu-jitsu, the ability to finish from the back is higher than it is typically from mount. But at the same time, this is stuff that was developed for fighting, more or less. And in regular fighting, mount is such a powerful position where you can land really hard strikes to parts of the body that are kind of most susceptible to hard strikes. Taking the back in a real fight is great. You're very, you're practically immune to damage on some level, but at the same time, your ability to deliver damage other than choking is kind of limited. You can kind of watch the old Hoist Gracie stuff, and he's elbowing people in the back. And that stuff is good, especially when they're like belly down, but the back position is not always a belly down position. So I don't know. That's probably for me one of the more contentious things, is to have mount score a little less than the back. I do really like the addition of the body triangle on the back as a scoring position, because I think it is a very powerful position and should be scored just the same in my mind as 2 hooks in your thighs or whatever. Now, on that note with mount and back, because it's somewhat relevant here, you have the ability to rescore in ADCC. So it doesn't have to go all the way back to guard to kind of reset things and be able to rescore. You can have the back, put your hooks in, take 1 hook out. If you leave it out for 3 seconds, put that hook back in for 3 seconds, you're going to rescore on the back position. Same with the mount. You can really rack up a lot of points there, but it's kind of situational, the ability to do that. If it's up to me, I'm not sure I love that idea of being able to rescore from those positions. I kind of feel like you need a rule of kind of a bit of a more significant positional change to amount for that score. I feel like it's just something that I just don't like, things where things seem like you game the system. Now, one of my favorite parts of the rule set of ADCC is that the notion of sweep is a much broader category. Essentially, every reversal is now a sweep in terms of scoring potential. So if I go from the bottom to the top, they'll call that a sweep in ADCC. I go from the bottom to the top. What might be called a reversal or a sweep based on leg positioning in IBJJF is now just one category sweep. bottom to top, and then how I land in top, just like takedowns, is taken into consideration. So if I bridge you out of mount and I end up in a guard, your closed guard potentially, 2 points for that. So anytime you reverse bottom to top, but you end up in a guard-like position, you're going to score 2 points. Anytime that you are reversing the position and you end up in a dominant position like cross sides or mount or something like that, you end up with 4 points because you are past the guard. I like that. I think that's a great system. I really think IBJJF rules are kind of wacky in that regard. I feel like anytime you're reversing bottom to top, if we think about fighting itself as such an important thing, I mean, a reversal from cross sides and then you end up in cross sides top is so much more significant in my mind than, like, you know, a lot of the sweeps that win IBJJF tournaments, where they're still like they sweep from open guard to open guard, which is a really common kind of, you know, low amplitude sweep, and now you've got your 2 points, it's 2-0, that guy wins. To me, that's not a, I don't feel like that really, you know, gets at some of the original aims of jiu-jitsu and kind of gets you off track in that regard. So that's kind of like all the rules and everything of ADCC. Let me know in the comments which rules you like or don't like, or if there's something that you feel that I missed that's really significant. I just hope you guys enjoy watching some ADCC matches after this a little more.